Life had never been easy for 19-year-old Lily Chen. Every morning she woke up at 5:30 to prepare breakfast for her two younger brothers before rushing to her first job at the local coffee shop. After 8 hours of serving endless cups of coffee and cleaning tables, she would run to her second job at a grocery store, where she worked until 9 in the evening. On weekends, she cleaned offices downtown, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans while most people her age were out having fun. 3 years ago, everything changed when her parents died in a terrible car accident. In one night, Lily went from being a carefree high school student to the sole provider for her family. Her brothers, Tommy and Kevin, were only 12 and 14 then. They needed food, clothes, school supplies, and most importantly, they needed someone to believe in them when the world seemed to have given up. The small apartment they lived in was nothing fancy. The walls were thin, the heater barely worked in winter, and sometimes the electricity got cut off when money was tight. But Lily made sure it was home. She cooked their favorite meals when she could afford the ingredients, helped them with homework late at night, and always made sure they knew they were loved. Her best friend Maya had been trying to convince her to take a break for months. "You're going to burn out, Lily," Maya would say. "You need to do something for yourself once in a while." But Lily couldn't see how taking time off would help when every dollar mattered. Then Maya came up with an idea that changed everything. "There is this fancy charity event happening next Saturday," Maya explained excitedly. "They're looking for servers and they pay really well for just one night. Plus you get to see how the other half lives. Come on, it could be fun." Lily hesitated. She had never worked at such an upscale event before. What if she made a mistake? What if she didn't fit in? But when Maya mentioned the pay was 3 times what she made in a regular shift, Lily knew she couldn't say no. That money could cover Tommy's school trip that she had been trying to save for. The event was being held at the famous Whitmore estate, a massive mansion on the hill overlooking the city. Lily had only seen it from a distance before, never imagining she would actually step foot inside. The Whitmore family was known throughout the city for their technology empire and their incredible wealth. Their charity foundation regularly made headlines for donating millions to various causes. On the night of the event, Lily put on the crisp white shirt and black pants that Maya had helped her find at a thrift store. She tied her long black hair back in a neat ponytail and took a deep breath as she approached the grand entrance of the mansion. The moment she stepped inside, Lily felt like she had entered a different world. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings, casting rainbow patterns across marble floors that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. Women in elegant gowns glided across the room, their jewelry sparkling under the lights, while men in expensive suits discussed business deals over glasses of wine that cost more than Lily's monthly grocery budget. The head server, Mrs. Patterson, quickly assigned Lily to work the main ballroom. "Keep the champagne glasses full, clear the empty plates quickly, and smile," she instructed. These people are used to excellent service. As Lily moved through the crowd with her tray, she listened to conversations about vacation homes in Europe, yacht parties, and investment opportunities. It was fascinating and overwhelming at the same time. These people lived in a completely different reality, where money was never a worry and dreams were always within reach. But what caught Lily's attention most was the beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner of the ballroom. It was a magnificent black Steinway, polished to perfection and positioned near the tall windows overlooking the garden. Throughout the evening, guests would pause to admire it, but no one played it. It sat there silent, like a sleeping giant waiting to come alive. Lily had learned to play piano at the community center when she was younger. Her parents had always dreamed of buying her a real piano, but they could only afford an old keyboard from a garage sale. Still, her mother would sit beside her every evening, encouraging her to practice. "Music is the language of the heart," her mother would say. "It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, music belongs to everyone." After her parents died, Lily rarely had time for music anymore. But sometimes, late at night when her brothers were asleep, she would sit at the old keyboard and play softly, remembering her mother's voice and feeling less alone in the world. Among all the elegant guests, one person stood out to Lily. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stood alone near the piano, constantly checking his phone. Unlike the other guests who were mingling and laughing, he seemed uncomfortable, almost annoyed to be there. His perfectly tailored suit probably cost more than Lily's car. but his expression suggested he would rather be anywhere else. Other servers whispered about him as they passed by. "That's Alexander Whitmore," one said. "The grandson. He's only here because his grandfather makes him come to these things." Another added, "I heard he made his first million by himself, but he's so cold, never talks to anyone." Lily watched Alexander from across the room as she served drinks. There was something about the way he looked at the piano when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't just casual interest. There was something deeper there, a longing that she recognized because she felt it too. During her 15-minute break, Lily found herself drawn to the piano. She stood beside it, running her fingers gently across the smooth surface, imagining the beautiful music it could create. The sounds of the party seemed to fade away as she lost herself in thoughts of melodies and harmonies. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. Lily turned around, startled. It was Alexander Whitmore standing just a few feet away. Up close, she could see that despite his expensive clothes and confident posture, his eyes looked tired, almost sad. "Yes, it really is," Lily replied honestly. "I was just wondering why no one plays it. It seems like such a waste for something so beautiful to stay silent." Alexander looked surprised by her response. Most people who tried to talk to him wanted something, a job, an investment, or just to be seen talking to someone wealthy. But this girl seemed genuinely interested in the piano, not in him. "Do you play?" he asked, his tone neutral but curious. "A little," Lily said modestly. "Nothing fancy, just simple songs. I learned on an old keyboard at the community center." She paused, then gathered her courage. "What about you? Do you know how to play?" Alexander's expression shifted slightly. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even vulnerability. But then his usual guarded mask returned. "I might know a song or two," he said coolly. Lily smiled warmly. "Would you maybe play something? I bet it would make everyone so happy. Sometimes people just need a little music to remind them of the beautiful things in life." Alexander stared at her, clearly not expecting such a request from a server. In his world, people didn't ask him to do things for others' happiness. They asked for money, for business favors, for connections. But this girl was asking him to share something beautiful with the world, expecting nothing in return. "I don't really perform for people," he said, his voice colder than before. But Lily didn't back down. Her smile remained genuine as she said, "That's okay. I understand. Sometimes music isn't about performing for others anyway. It's about sharing something beautiful with the world, even if it's just for a moment." Alexander felt something shift inside him. This girl, who clearly had so little compared to everyone else in the room, was talking about sharing beauty with the world. She wasn't trying to impress him or get something from him. She was simply asking him to do something kind. For the first time in years, Alexander found himself actually considering the request. He looked at the piano, then back at Lily's hopeful face, and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The desire to make someone else happy without expecting anything in return. The party continued around them, with wealthy guests discussing their privileged lives, completely unaware that in this quiet corner by the piano, two very different worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way. Alexander Whitmore had never been comfortable at social events, especially ones thrown by his family. Tonight was no different. He stood near the grand piano, checking his phone every few minutes, counting down the hours until he could politely leave. These charity galas were always the same. Wealthy people writing checks to feel good about themselves while discussing their latest purchases and vacation plans. At 23, Alexander had already proven he could succeed without his family's money. While his classmates were still figuring out their majors in college, he had dropped out to start his own software company, working 18-hour days in a tiny apartment, living on instant noodles and coffee. He had built something from nothing. When his app was finally acquired by a major tech company for several $1 million, he had felt proud for the first time in years. But tonight, surrounded by people who only saw him as the Whitmore heir, that pride felt hollow. No one here cared about his hard work or his achievements. They only cared about his last name and what connections he could provide. "Alexander, darling," Mrs. Henderson, one of his grandfather's old friends, approached with her usual fake smile. "How wonderful to see you here. My daughter just graduated from business school and I was thinking—" "Excuse me," Alexander interrupted politely but firmly. "I need to make a phone call." He had perfected the art of escaping unwanted conversations. Phone calls, bathroom breaks, sudden headaches. He had used every excuse in the book. Tonight was supposed to be about raising money for children's education, but it felt more like a networking event for the wealthy elite. As he stood alone again, Alexander's eyes wandered to the beautiful Steinway piano beside him. He remembered when his grandfather had first bought it, how excited Alexander had been as a 10-year-old to finally have a real piano to practice on. Back then, music had been everything to him. He would spend hours at this very piano, losing himself in the complex melodies of Chopin, the emotional depth of Rachmaninoff, the precise beauty of Bach. Those were simpler times before his parents' marriage fell apart, before music became another battlefield in their war against each other. His mother had pushed him to perform, entering him in competition after competition, using his talent to show off to her social circle. His father had grown resentful, calling music a waste of time that would never teach Alexander how to run a business. When they divorced, music became just another thing they fought over. His mother wanted him to pursue a career as a concert pianist. His father wanted him to forget music entirely and focus on business. Caught in the middle, Alexander had chosen neither. He stopped playing publicly, letting his talent become a private matter that belonged only to him. Now, 5 years later, he rarely touched the piano. But sometimes, late at night in his penthouse apartment, he would sit at his electric keyboard and play softly, remembering what it felt like when music was pure joy instead of another source of family conflict. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice startled him out of his thoughts. He turned to see a young woman standing beside the piano, her hand gently touching its polished surface. She was one of the servers, he realized, wearing the simple black and white uniform that marked her as staff rather than guest. There was something different about her, though. While the other servers moved through the crowd with professional detachment, this girl seemed genuinely amazed by everything around her. Her eyes held a wonder that Alexander hadn't seen in years, not since he was a child discovering the world. "Yes, it really is," she replied when he asked if she played. "I was just wondering why no one plays it. It seems like such a waste for something so beautiful to stay silent." Alexander found himself studying her face. She couldn't be much younger than him, but there was an innocence in her expression that suggested she hadn't yet become cynical about the world. When was the last time he had met someone who wasn't trying to get something from him? "Do you play?" he asked, genuinely curious about her answer. "A little," she said with a modest smile. "Nothing fancy, just simple songs. I learned on an old keyboard at the community center." Alexander felt a strange pang at her words. She had learned on an old keyboard while he had grown up with the finest instruments money could buy, yet there was no bitterness in her voice, no resentment about what she lacked. If anything, she seemed grateful for what little she had. "What about you? Do you know how to play?" The question hung in the air between them. Alexander could have lied, could have dismissed her with the same cold indifference he showed everyone else. But something about her genuine curiosity made him hesitate. "I might know a song or two," he said carefully. Then came the request that changed everything. "Would you maybe play something? I bet it would make everyone so happy. Sometimes people just need a little music to remind them of the beautiful things in life." Alexander stared at her in shock. In his world, people asked for business favors, investment opportunities, and social connections. They asked for things that would benefit them directly. But this girl was asking him to do something purely for the happiness of others, expecting nothing in return except the joy of shared music. His first instinct was to shut her down. "I don't really perform for people," he said, his voice automatically turning cold the way it did when he felt threatened or vulnerable. But she didn't back away like most people did when he used that tone. Instead, her smile remained warm and understanding. "That's okay, I understand. Sometimes music isn't about performing for others anyway. It's about sharing something beautiful with the world, even if it's just for a moment." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. This girl, who was clearly working hard to make ends meet, who probably faced struggles he couldn't imagine, was talking about sharing beauty with the world. She wasn't asking him to show off or prove anything. She was simply asking him to do something kind. He looked around the ballroom at all the wealthy guests in their expensive clothes, discussing their privileged problems, and then back at this server, who somehow understood that music was about more than status or performance. It was about connection, about touching something deeper in the human spirit. For years, Alexander had convinced himself that his music was too personal to share, that performing would only lead to more conflict and manipulation like it had with his parents. But looking at this girl's hopeful face, he realized that maybe the problem wasn't with sharing music itself. Maybe the problem was that he had been sharing it with the wrong people for the wrong reasons. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. "Lily," she replied, seeming surprised by the question. "Lily," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "And you really think people would want to hear someone play?" "I think people always want to hear beautiful music," she said simply. "It reminds us that there's still magic in the world even when life gets hard." Alexander glanced at his phone, then at the piano, then back at Lily's face. Around them, the party continued with its usual superficial chatter and polite laughter. But in this small corner by the piano, something real was happening. Someone was asking him to share a part of himself not for profit or status, but simply because she believed music could make the world a little brighter. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the familiar pull of the piano keys calling to him. Not because someone was forcing him to play, not because it would advance his career or impress anyone important, but because someone believed that what he had to offer was beautiful and worth sharing. He took a deep breath, feeling both terrified and excited. Maybe it was time to remember what music felt like when it came from the heart, instead of from obligation. "You know what?" he said, surprising himself with his own words. "Maybe you're right. Maybe people do need a little music in their lives." Lily's face lit up with genuine joy, and Alexander realized that her happiness at his simple agreement was more rewarding than any business deal he had ever closed. As he moved toward the piano bench, he felt like he was taking the first real step he had taken in years toward something that mattered. The moment Alexander moved toward the piano bench, something shifted in the atmosphere of the grand ballroom. Conversations began to quiet as guests noticed the young Whitmore heir approaching the magnificent Steinway. Many of them had attended these charity events for years, and Alexander was known for keeping to himself, checking his phone, and leaving as early as possible. "Is he actually going to play?" whispered Mrs. Chen, the mayor's wife, to her companion. "Alexander Whitmore? I doubt it," replied Mr. Davidson, a prominent lawyer. "He's all business, that one. Probably just looking at his phone again." But Alexander wasn't looking at his phone. For the first time all evening, he had put it away completely. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the piano, not from nervousness about the crowd, but from the emotion of returning to something he had abandoned years ago. Lily watched from a few steps away, holding her breath. She could see the internal struggle on Alexander's face, the war between the guarded businessman he had become and the musician he used to be. Part of her wondered if she had pushed too hard, if she had asked too much of a stranger. Alexander sat down on the piano bench and adjusted his position, his fingers hovering over the keys without touching them. The ballroom had grown noticeably quieter now, with more and more guests turning to watch this unexpected development. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few seemed annoyed that their conversations were being interrupted. "What's he doing?" someone murmured. "Probably just posing for photos," another guest replied dismissively. Alexander heard the whispers but tried to block them out. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about Lily's words echoing in his mind. Sometimes music isn't about performing for others. It's about sharing something beautiful with the world. He closed his eyes and let his fingers find their way to the keys. The first note rang out clear and pure, instantly silencing every conversation in the room. It was a simple note, but played with such intention and clarity that it commanded attention. Then came the second note, and the third, as Alexander began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire, a composition that even professional pianists approached with respect and careful preparation. The piece was known for its emotional complexity, shifting from gentle, almost whispered passages to thunderous, passionate climaxes. As the familiar melody began to unfold, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The music wasn't just notes on a page anymore. It was a living, breathing expression of everything he had kept locked inside. The loneliness of building his business in isolation, the pain of his parents' bitter divorce, the frustration of being misunderstood by everyone around him. All of it poured through his fingers into the keys. The guests stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, Conversations completely forgotten. This wasn't the cold, distant young man they thought they knew. This was someone pouring his soul into music with a skill and passion that left them speechless. Lily felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened. She had hoped Alexander might know a simple song, maybe something light and cheerful to brighten the evening. She had never expected this level of artistry, this depth of emotion. Every note seemed to tell a story, and she found herself understanding things about Alexander that he had never spoken aloud. The piece moved through its various moods, sometimes gentle as a whisper, sometimes bold as a declaration, sometimes desperate as a cry for help. Alexander's technique was flawless, but more than that, his interpretation was deeply personal. He wasn't just playing the notes. He was living them, breathing them, making them his own. Mrs. Henderson, who had been trying to introduce Alexander to her daughter earlier, stood with her mouth slightly open. "I had no idea," she whispered to her husband. "In all these years I never knew he could play like this." The mayor leaned over to his wife. "This is extraordinary. He's playing at a professional level. How did we not know about this?" Even the servers had stopped working, standing at the edges of the room with their trays forgotten. Completely absorbed in the performance, Mrs. Patterson, the head server, had been managing these events for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like this. As the piece built toward its climactic section, Alexander's entire body became involved in the music. His shoulders swayed with the rhythm. His face showed the intensity of the emotions he was channeling, and his fingers moved across the keys with a precision and power that seemed almost supernatural. Lily watched in amazement as this reserved, seemingly cold young man transformed before her eyes. This was who he really was underneath the expensive suits and guarded expressions. This was his true self, passionate, vulnerable, deeply feeling, and incredibly talented. The music reached its powerful climax, with thunderous chords that seemed to make the crystal chandeliers vibrate in response. Alexander played with such force and conviction that several guests stepped back instinctively, overwhelmed by the sheer power of the sound. Then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the music began to calm. The final section of the ballad was like a gentle goodbye, soft and contemplative, as if Alexander was slowly returning from a journey to a place only he had been. The last notes faded into silence, leaving the entire ballroom in a state of stunned quiet. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched on as 300 guests tried to process what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a talented amateur playing a party piece. This was a master musician who had just delivered a performance that would have been worthy of any concert hall in the world. Then suddenly, the silence broke. Someone began clapping, then another, and within seconds the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. People who had been gossiping and networking just minutes before were now on their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm and amazement. "Bravo!" shouted someone from the back of the room. "Incredible!" called out another guest. The applause went on, but Alexander seemed barely aware of it. His eyes were fixed on Lily, who had moved closer to the piano during the performance. She was crying openly now, not caring who saw her tears. Her face showed a mixture of joy, gratitude, and something deeper. Recognition. She had seen the real Alexander, the person he kept hidden from the world, and she understood that what had just happened was about so much more than music. Alexander slowly stood up from the piano bench, still looking at Lily. The crowd was still applauding enthusiastically, but for him, the only reaction that mattered was hers. In her tears and her smile, he saw something he had been searching for without even knowing it. Someone who understood that his music came from a place of genuine emotion, not from a desire to impress or manipulate. "How long have you been playing?" called out one of the guests. "Where did you study?" shouted another. "Will you play another piece?" But Alexander didn't answer any of their questions. Instead, he made his way through the crowd toward Lily, who was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, still smiling through her tears. "Thank you," he said quietly when he reached her, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "Thank you," Lily replied, confused. "I should be thanking you. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "You asked me to share something beautiful with the world," Alexander said, his usual cold demeanor completely gone. "I haven't done that in years. I had forgotten what it felt like." Around them, the party was slowly returning to normal, but with a different energy. Guests were animated, excited, discussing what they had just witnessed. Several people were trying to approach Alexander, but he seemed oblivious to everyone except Lily. "I could see it in your eyes," Lily said softly. "When you looked at the piano earlier, I could see that you had a special connection to music. I just hoped you might share a little bit of it." Alexander felt something shift inside him, something that had been frozen for years beginning to thaw. This girl had seen something in him that no one else had bothered to look for. She had asked him to be vulnerable, to share his true self, and instead of using it against him or trying to profit from it, she had simply been grateful for the beauty of it. For the first time in years, Alexander felt like he had done something that truly mattered. Not closing a business deal, not making money, not impressing the right people, just sharing a piece of his soul with someone who appreciated it for what it was. The evening had started as another obligation, another social event to endure. But thanks to a simple request from a girl who believed in the power of music to make the world more beautiful, it had become something extraordinary. And as Alexander looked at Lily's tear-stained but radiant face, he realized that this was just the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand, but very much wanted to explore. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for both Alexander and Lily. Guests kept approaching Alexander, praising his performance and asking questions about his musical background, but he found it difficult to focus on their conversations. His mind kept drifting back to that moment when Lily had asked him to share something beautiful with the world, and how natural it had felt to say yes. Lily returned to her serving duties, but she moved through the crowd in a daze. Every time she caught a glimpse of Alexander across the room, surrounded by admirers, she felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. She was happy that people were finally seeing the incredible talent he possessed, but she also felt like something precious had been shared between them that was now being diluted by all the attention from others. When her shift finally ended at 11 o'clock, Lily was exhausted but unable to shake the memory of Alexander's performance. She had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the technical skill of his playing, but the raw emotion behind it. She had seen someone reveal their true self through music, and it had been more moving than anything she had ever experienced. As she gathered her things from the staff room, planning to catch the last bus home to her brother's, she was surprised to find Alexander waiting for her in the hallway outside the kitchen. "Hi," he said simply, his hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. "Hi," Lily replied, equally surprised. "Shouldn't you be in there celebrating with everyone?" "They're all talking about your performance," Alexander shook his head. "I needed some quiet. All that attention, it's not really what I was looking for when I decided to play." They stood in the quiet hallway for a moment, the sounds of the party fading behind them. In the softer lighting away from the ballroom, Alexander looked younger, less guarded than he had earlier. "Can I ask you something?" Alexander said. "How did you know? How did you know I could play like that?" Lily thought about her answer carefully. "I didn't know for sure, but when you looked at the piano, I saw something in your eyes. The same look I get when I see a piano, like you were remembering something important that you missed." "You play too," Alexander said. "It wasn't a question this time." "Not like you," Lily said with a small laugh. "I told you I learned on an old keyboard. Nothing fancy." "Music doesn't have to be fancy to be meaningful," Alexander said quietly. "Sometimes the simplest songs carry the most emotion." They began walking toward the exit together, neither of them questioning why they were leaving at the same time or where they were going. It felt natural, like a conversation that had been waiting to happen for years. "Can I tell you something?" Alexander said as they stepped outside into the cool night air. "I haven't played for anyone in over 5 years." "Not like that. Why not?" Lily asked gently. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. "Music used to be the most important thing in my life. When I was a kid, I would practice for hours every day. I loved everything about it. The way the keys felt under my fingers. The way a melody could express things that words couldn't say. The way a perfect phrase could make me feel like I was flying." Lily listened without interrupting, sensing that this was something Alexander rarely talked about. "But then my parents started fighting," he continued. "They used my music as another weapon against each other. My mom would force me to perform at her social events to show off. My dad would get angry about the time I spent practicing, saying it was taking away from more important things like business and money. Eventually, music stopped being about joy and became about winning some battle I never wanted to fight. So you stopped playing? Lily asked softly. I stopped playing for other people, Alexander clarified. I couldn't handle the way they turned something I loved into something painful. It was easier to just keep it to myself. They had reached the street where Lily would normally catch her bus, but neither of them moved toward the bus stop. The conversation felt too important to end. I'm sorry, Lily said. That must have been really hard, having something you love turned into something that hurt you. Alexander looked at her with surprise. Most people, when they heard about his family problems, focused on the money and privilege. They couldn't understand why someone with so many advantages would have real pain, but Lily seemed to understand exactly what he meant. What about you? Alexander asked. You said you learned at the community center. Do you still play? Lily's expression grew wistful. Not as much as I used to. Life got really complicated a few years ago. She paused, then decided to be honest. My parents died in a car accident when I was 16. I had to become responsible for my 2 younger brothers. Between work and taking care of them, there isn't much time for music anymore. Alexander felt a shock run through him. Here he had been complaining about his parents using his music for their own purposes, while Lily had lost her parents entirely and was raising her siblings on her own. I'm so sorry, he said, and the sincerity in his voice surprised them both. That must be incredibly difficult. How old are your brothers? Tommy is 15 now and Kevin is 17, Lily said with a small smile. They're good kids. Tommy wants to be a doctor and Kevin is amazing at math. They work hard in school and they help out as much as they can. We take care of each other. And you work multiple jobs to support them? 3 jobs, Lily confirmed. Coffee shop, grocery store, and office cleaning. Plus tonight's catering job. It's not always easy, but we make it work. Alexander stared at her in amazement. While he had been feeling sorry for himself about his privileged problems, this girl had been dealing with real challenges and still maintaining hope and kindness. She was working 3 jobs to support her family. And yet she had taken the time to encourage him to share his music with others. Where do you play now? He asked. When you do have time for music? There's an old piano at the community center where I used to take lessons, Lily said. Sometimes on Sundays when the boys are doing homework, I go there and play for a little while. There are usually some kids around and they like to listen. It reminds me of why I fell in love with music in the first place. What do you mean? Music isn't about being perfect or impressive, Lily explained. It's about connection. When I play simple songs for those kids and I see their faces light up, I remember that music is supposed to bring joy. It's supposed to remind us that there's beauty in the world even when things are hard. Alexander felt something click into place in his mind. That's what you meant earlier when you said music is about sharing something beautiful with the world. Exactly, Lily said, her face brightening. Tonight, when you played that incredible piece, you weren't just showing off your talent. You were sharing a piece of your heart. Everyone in that room felt it. That's what music is supposed to do. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the conversation. Alexander felt like he was seeing music through completely new eyes, not as a source of conflict or a tool for manipulation, but as a way to connect with others and bring beauty into the world. Lily, he said suddenly, would you maybe want to show me this community center sometime? I'd love to hear you play. Lily looked surprised. You want to come to the community center? It's not exactly... She gestured toward the mansion behind them. It's not like this place. I think I've had enough of places like this for a while, Alexander said with a smile that transformed his entire face. I'd much rather see where music actually brings joy to people. Lily felt her heart skip a beat. You really mean that? I really do, Alexander said. Tonight you reminded me of something I had forgotten. Maybe you could help me remember a little more. As if on cue, Lily's bus appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. She should have been running to catch it. Missing the last bus would mean a long, expensive taxi ride home. But instead, she found herself reluctant to end this conversation. That's my bus, she said reluctantly. Alexander looked at the approaching bus, then back at Lily. Can I give you a ride home? I have my car here. Lily hesitated. Accepting a ride from someone she had just met, especially someone so wealthy and powerful, probably wasn't the smartest decision. But something about Alexander felt genuine and safe. More than that, she wasn't ready for this conversation to end either. Okay, she said. Thank you. As they walked toward Alexander's car, a modest sedan that surprised Lily with its ordinariness, she realized that this night had changed something fundamental in both of their lives. They had each shared something precious and vulnerable, and in doing so, they had found an unexpected connection that neither of them fully understood yet. What had started as a simple request to play piano had become the beginning of something much deeper, a friendship built on mutual understanding, shared love of music, and the recognition that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we're brave enough to show our true selves to another person. As Alexander opened the car door for her, Lily felt like she was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one where beautiful music and unexpected friendships were possible, even in the midst of everyday struggles. 2 weeks after the charity gala, Alexander found himself sitting in his penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline but unable to focus on the financial reports spread across his desk. Ever since that night, something had fundamentally shifted in his perspective. The business deals that used to excite him now felt hollow, and the success that had once driven him seemed meaningless. He couldn't stop thinking about Lily's words about music being meant to bring joy and connection to people. More than that, he couldn't stop thinking about the way her face had lit up when she talked about playing simple songs for children at the community center. There was something pure about her approach to music that made his own complicated relationship with it seem unnecessarily painful. Finally, unable to concentrate any longer, Alexander made a decision that surprised even him. He left his office in the middle of the day, something he never did, and drove across town to the community center Lily had mentioned. The Riverside Community Center was nothing like the elegant venues Alexander was used to. The building was old and could use some repairs, with faded paint on the walls and worn carpeting in the hallways. But there was something warm and welcoming about it that the fancy hotels and country clubs he frequented completely lacked. He could hear piano music coming from one of the rooms, and he followed the sound until he found a small room with an old upright piano and about 15 children sitting on the floor in a semicircle. At the piano was Lily, playing a simple melody and singing along with the kids. Alexander stood in the doorway unnoticed, watching this scene that was so different from the formal performance he had given at the gala. Lily's technique wasn't perfect and the old piano was slightly out of tune, but the joy in the room was infectious. The children were completely engaged, some singing along, others swaying to the rhythm, all of them clearly having the time of their lives. This was what music was supposed to be, Alexander realized. Not a competition or a performance to impress others, but a shared experience that brought people together and made them happy. When the song ended, the children applauded enthusiastically, and Lily looked up to see Alexander standing in the doorway. Her face showed surprise, then genuine happiness. "Mr. Alexander," called out one of the children, a little girl with pigtails. "Are you here to hear Miss Lily play piano too?" "Actually," Alexander said, stepping into the room, "I was hoping Miss Lily might let me play something for all of you." The children erupted in excited whispers. Lily looked uncertain. "Alexander, you don't have to." "I want to," he said simply, "if that's okay with everyone." The next hour was unlike anything Alexander had experienced in years. He played simple songs that the children could sing along with, taught them basic rhythms they could clap to, and even let some of the older kids try playing a few notes themselves. There was no pressure to be perfect, no one judging his technique or comparing him to other performers. It was just music for the pure joy of it. After the children were picked up by their parents, Alexander and Lily sat alone in the quiet room with the old piano. "Thank you," Lily said. "You made their whole week. They've never had anyone play for them like that." "Thank you," Alexander replied. "I haven't enjoyed playing music that much in years. Maybe ever." They talked for another hour about music, about life, about their completely different backgrounds and surprisingly similar dreams. When Alexander finally left that day, he knew that something important had changed in his life. Over the next few months, Alexander became a regular visitor to the community center. At first, he came just to play piano for the children's programs, but gradually he began to see other needs that weren't being met. The center needed new instruments, better facilities, and more programs to serve the growing number of families who relied on its services. Instead of just writing a check like he would have in the past, Alexander got involved personally. He organized fundraising events, using his business connections to bring in donors who had never considered supporting community programs before. He worked with Lily to develop new music education initiatives, combining his resources with her understanding of what the community actually needed. The changes in Alexander's life didn't go unnoticed. His grandfather, who had always worried that Alexander was too focused on business at the expense of everything else, was delighted to see his grandson engaged with the family foundation's charitable work in a meaningful way. "You seem different," his grandfather said one day over lunch. "Happier. More like the boy who used to spend hours at the piano when he was young." Alexander smiled. "I remembered why I fell in love with music in the first place. And I met someone who helped me see that success isn't just about making money, it's about making a difference." 6 months after that first night at the charity gala, Alexander made a proposal that shocked everyone who knew him. He wanted to establish a permanent music education program through the Whitmore Foundation, with a significant annual budget and a full-time staff. But more than that, he wanted to serve as the program director himself, splitting his time between his business ventures and this new passion project. The program would provide free music lessons, instruments, and performance opportunities for children and families who couldn't otherwise afford them. It would partner with schools and community centers throughout the city, bringing music education to places where it had never been available before. At the program's launch event, held at the same community center where Alexander had rediscovered his love of music, he and Lily performed together for the first time. She had written a song called "Finding Home in Music," and Alexander had composed a piano accompaniment that perfectly complemented her lyrics. As they performed for a room full of children, families, donors, and community leaders, Alexander realized that this was what success really looked like. Not the cold achievement of closing business deals or accumulating wealth, but the warm satisfaction of using his talents and resources to bring joy and opportunity to others. After the performance, as the audience applauded and children ran up to hug both of them, Alexander felt a contentment he had never experienced before. He had found his purpose, and it had nothing to do with impressing anyone or proving his worth. It was simply about sharing the gift of music with people who appreciated it for what it truly was: a universal language of joy, hope, and human connection. Lily, standing beside him as children chattered excitedly about the music they had just heard, felt equally transformed. What had started as a simple request for someone to play piano at a fancy party had become something she never could have imagined. She now had a steady job doing work she loved. Her brothers had access to educational opportunities they never could have afforded, and she had found a true partner in someone who shared her belief that music could make the world a better place. Later that evening, as they cleaned up after the event, Alexander and Lily found themselves alone with the old upright piano where their friendship had truly begun. "Do you ever think about that night at the charity gala?" Alexander asked. "About what would have happened if you hadn't asked me to play?" Lily considered the question. "I think you would have found your way back to music eventually. You have too much talent and too much love for it to keep it hidden forever." "Maybe," Alexander said, "but I don't think I would have learned what music really means without you. You taught me that it's not about being the best or impressing people. It's about sharing something beautiful with the world. Just like you said that first night." They sat together on the piano bench, and Alexander began to play softly, not a complex classical piece this time, but a simple melody that seemed to capture everything they had both learned about music, friendship, and finding purpose in helping others. As the music filled the quiet room, both of them knew that they had found something precious that night at the charity gala, not just a friendship but a shared mission that would continue to grow and touch more lives in the years to come. The young millionaire who had once been known for his cold business focus had become someone who understood that true wealth came from the connections we make and the joy we bring to others. And the hardworking girl who had been struggling just to survive had found that sometimes, when we're brave enough to ask for something beautiful, the world responds in ways we never dared to imagine. Their story had started with a simple request to share music, but it had become something much larger, a testament to the power of authentic connection, the importance of following our passions, and the incredible things that can happen when two people from different worlds discover they share the same dreams.